Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's show. My name is Spencer Ross. Thank you so much for joining us. We've got a great one for you today. As always, wishing you a happy Juneteenth. Had to get the show in today. Couldn't be a white person taking off on Juneteenth, even though it is a national holiday. But we do have a very good, very important show for you today. In fact, a great show, I might say. We are talking today about the Greek Coast Guard under scrutiny for their response to migrant mass drowning, a really, really horrific situation off the coast of Greece in the Mediterranean, where we saw a massive boat completely overcrowded, flip over, just completely capsize. Hundreds were killed, and the speculation is the Greek Coast Guard especially, and it's seeming to be a bit more than speculation at this point, stood by and let it happen. Really some pretty awful, awful stuff. We'll get into all of it. A pretty remarkable report out by Ryan Grimm, getting into some documents that link the potential COVID patient zero to a U.S.-funded research lab, the infamous Wuhan Institute of Virology, who fell ill in November of 2019. We'll tell you his name, how it happened, how that all worked on the show today. Also, Israel has killed 5 Palestinians in the Jenin refugee camp, which has been a increasing home of resistance, and we pay tribute to an iconic civil rights figure, Fannie Lou Hamer, and her very important speech to the 1964 DNC. To end off the show on this Juneteenth holiday. I hope everyone had a pretty good day as we're recording this at the end of the day. Probably most of you will be listening to this in the morning. So with that being said, we got to talk about this really awful situation in Greece. This is from the New York Times. Shortly after a rickety fishing boat, and this, by the way, for those of you who don't know, we really don't talk about it too much in America, but those Euros over there, they have their own kind of crisis at the border, and that is obviously coming from the Mediterranean. A lot of the really just crisis situations that Europe has either created or exacerbated in a lot of situations and throughout the global South. A lot of those situations, things are kind of coming home to roost. Chickens are kind of coming home to roost, and a lot of the people in those regions are kind of global refugees. Syrian war was a big problem. Now you have a bunch of Afghans and Iraqis coming, up north from the Middle East, trying to get to Europe via, really unsafe small boats in the Mediterranean. And there's, a bunch of other countries, pretty much any place where anything bad is happening. You see a real effort to kind of come through here. And it's led to some tragedy before, it's led to some, really horrific media reactions before. There was this kind of infamous BBC in England. They had this morning news show where they essentially took out a little kind of small fishing boat and followed another small fishing boat that was overwhelmed with refugees, and essentially filmed it, just pulled up alongside and just tried to, essentially just gawk at these people on a struggle for their lives in a news boat, which, was just really incredible to watch. And that just kind of gives you a little bit of a insight, as if CNN went down to the Mexican border and, just drove up in a, some really nice car, luxuriously alongside a train full of migrants trying to come up to, from Central America up to the U.S.-Mexico border. It was really just that level of kind of voyeurism, just not really caring about the situation. But it kind of, I think speaks to the broader attitude that many of these Europeans have towards the Americans, have towards the refugees from many parts of Africa, the Middle East, all that. A lot of Pakistanis apparently were on this capsized boat off the coast of Greece. So it was a rickety fishing boat that carrying hundreds of smuggled migrants sank in front of a Greek Coast Guard vessel last week. Greek officials explained that they had not intervened because the smugglers didn't want them to. Intervening also would have been dangerous, Coast Guard spokesman Nicholas Alexiou said, given the ship was overcrowded and filled with migrants intent on reaching Italy. trying to violently stop its course without cooperation from crew or passengers could have provoked a maritime accident, said Alexiou. He added that even though the ship was in Greece's search and rescue territory, you can't intervene in international waters against a boat that is not engaged in smuggling or some other crime. Alexiou apparently meant smuggling drugs or guns, but not people. So, not really, paying attention really to the situation, whether it was clearly some sort of kind of people smuggling going on here. And there was a little bit of debate about this, because apparently the ship did, at least according to these Greek officials, did turn down any request from help because, they obviously probably feared they'd be arrested, deported, whatever. And they, because of that, of course, again, this is kind of the claim of the Greek officials here, they ended up just capsizing or sinking. Really horrific situation. 700 men, women, and children from Syria, Pakistan, and Egypt drowned. The decision not to intervene has raised concerns that an alignment of interest between smugglers paid to reach Italy and Greek authorities who would rather the migrants be Italy's problem led to an avoidable catastrophe. So again, just kind of again, there is some debate about this, whether it was the fault of the migrants, or not the fault of the migrants, but it was kind of on the captain to not accept the help of the ship, which is what the Greek authorities kind of say, and a lot of other people are also saying that, you still have a duty to intervene, even if it looks fine, because of the fact that it's a clearly dangerous situation. These people, whether they're Greek, Egyptian, Syrian, Pakistan, anywhere, they could die. They're humans, they could die. They're on a very dangerous ship, overcrowded, teetering on the edge. You have a duty to, and you're the Coast Guard. You're supposed to, this could be a dangerous job. It's kind of what you signed up for, So I don't think danger is a really legitimate excuse, especially when you're in a position to save people and there is saving that needs to be done and you're like, oh, it's too dangerous. So yeah, if the Greek Coast Guard recognized the boat as in distress, and this is an objective assessment, they should have tried to rescue them no matter what, said Markella Papadouli, a lawyer who specializes in maritime law and human rights at the Advice on Individual Rights in Europe Center. She said no SOS call had been required as the Greeks insisted. So it's one of the many people who are saying, hey, this Greek excuse is kind of BS. And while there were reports of distress calls being relayed to the Greeks, she said that focusing on the call was besides the point. Regardless of what the smugglers wanted or where the migrants hoped to go, she said you have an obligation to rescue when a ship is in grave danger. Because, wouldn't you rather, if you're Greek, I think if you're Greek officials here, this is probably going to be a bigger scandal than if they had just picked them up off of the boat. On Monday, Greek authorities came under more pressure as new accusations of negligence surfaced and survivor accounts began to trickle out, describing a hapless captain and in trouble, and even some suggestions the Greek Coast Guard had accidentally caused the sinking. This came from a BBC report demonstrating the trawler full of migrants didn't move for 7 hours on Thursday. The Greek Coast Guard on Monday counted the boat had traveled 30 nautical miles from its detection Tuesday morning until it sank. So Greek officials are pointing the finger at 9 men currently under arrest. The suspected smugglers, they say, rejected water to keep migrants thirsty and docile and to maintain control, which is really, pretty bad. I think, honestly, it's pretty clear they're both at fault. Because, looking realistically, these are, not even just objectively, like these people who were driving the boat and crewing the boat are obviously people smuggling, doing some pretty bad stuff. But, it's, essentially pretty clear is the way I'd put it, that Greece was in the wrong, violating maritime laws. A lot of experts come in that consensus, not just that one lawyer, as here in the New York Times. A 2014 European Union law establishing rules for the surveillance of the external sea borders counts among criteria for rescue the existence of a request for assistance, although such request shall not be the sole factor for determining the existence of a distress situation. They were kind of treating it there as a sole factor. But broadly here, big picture, this really shows you what is the European Union good for, and kind of like real sense, because they have been absolutely incapable of dealing with this problem. Any of these kind of Southern European countries, really any of the countries in general, Northern European countries like the UK are also content to, make life as absolutely tough as possible for migrants, really just getting rid of any kind of pathways to citizenship inside the country. And, what they call it over there is the safe and legal routes into the country. At least they call it in England. And they make it really, really hard for, what they put them up. Originally, they were putting them up in hotels. Now they put them up in this big barge that they're just floating off of the sea of one of their ports. So it's just kind of becoming a pretty desperate situation. And there really is also no effort to stop some of these pull factors that we see being made, just all across these kind of hotspot areas, like Pakistan, especially areas in the Middle East, like Syria, for example. That is a big problem. And, how can you house them? How can you, kind of integrate them into the society, especially some of these populations where there's kind of really stagnating economic and population growth, beyond a humanitarian. You probably argue that they even have some sort of really have a selfish interest, a kind of desire for the better, the better looking, a better opportunity here, essentially, for the economic growth, and trying to get some of their kind of ducks in a row because of the really rough times a lot of European economies have been having, and just kind of a real stagnation of labor. U.S. in that same boat as well, but not really as bad as the European countries. Just again, no clear solution, no kind of unified European solution. That not happening, and not really any kind of great strategy for countries handling it as well. There has been some good efforts. Europeans have kind of been, I think, slightly better than the Americans. The Germans kind of saying, "Wir schaffen das." So kind of very German. We'll manage it. We'll handle them. The kind of Angela Merkel line there from the mid 2010s was a really kind of influx, and per capita they are better than us in terms of taking in these countries, or taking these refugees. But in terms of really kind of integrating them into society, it's trending worse, and some of the problems that are bringing them there, really show no signs of stopping. And a lot of those problems, again, European Union countries had a pretty critical role in instigating. All right, this is a new one. At 12:49 here in the podcast, we are going to take a little commercial break, and after that, an announcement. All right, so hopefully you heard an ad there. If not, that's okay. That's the problem with the Spreaker network. But here is a little bit of an announcement for you about an exciting way you can contribute to the show. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for listening and supporting Newsflash. We now have a brand new way for you to be heard if you want, whether a text message or a audio message. Please, no video messages. I really just do not think that's necessary. We have a new feedback box open for you. Ladies and gentlemen, it is officially open. SWRN702@gmail.com. Send a text message, send a voice message of no more than 30 seconds via the voice memos function. Either of those two options, and we will 100%, not going to find this guarantee anywhere else. We're going to play it on the show, listen to what you have to say, and it literally could be about anything. Well, if it's inappropriate, we won't play it, but it could be about anything. Thank you so much. This is my thank you to all the listeners who have stuck out with us and want to have their own voice in the show. SWRN702@gmail.com is the address. SWRN702@gmail.com. Waiting for that email box to fill up. You can send a text message. You can send also a voice message. Very easy to do. Just go to the voice memos on your phone. Just share it through Gmail. Click that little box with the arrow through it, and there you go. Anyway, so yeah, going on now to a really interesting and important story. And this is really going to be a pretty controversial one as well, just kind of coming in. It's something that we honestly have not really covered within the context of the show that much is the lab leak situation. So, it's kind of tough. It's definitely kind of tough because it is a situation, where you almost kind of don't want, I originally kind of impulsed to, my basic impulse is, let the truth out there. It's important for people to know what's going on, and, kind of get a better understanding of the facts of what happened in a really, really important situation. And I think there's a really, lessons that we can learn from this that are not just, screw China leaked the virus, or anything really just frankly idiotic like that. But as I've kind of considered it more, I kind of almost in a weird way don't want it to be true and almost don't want it to come out because I frankly do not trust this country or, frankly a lot of the other countries around the world, especially, Europe and places like that, to handle this news with any sort of just normalcy and just, kind of basic logic because, it is becoming really increasingly clear, I think, kind of beyond all evidence, that, the preponderance of evidence suggests, is how I'd phrase it, that, in fact, the wet market theory, the kind of, there's a wet market right next door from the Wuhan Institute of Virology where they're kind of studying this kind of gain-of-function research. It is kind of becoming more and more flimsy by the day. So basically, the story goes, the lab leak theory goes, is there's this kind of gain-of-function research. And, first, it's important to preface with the fact that things leak out of labs all the time. It's a really common occurrence. Just it's almost kind of the cost of doing business for a lot of these places. And the Wuhan Institute of Virology is quite U.S. funded literally by the NIH, literally by Dr. Fauci, who's in these emails talking about, do we fund them or not? How much we fund them? And I think I think Peter Daszak is the other guy who is kind of his partner in crime here. And they were really supporting the gain-of-function research, which is to modify viruses in the lab for research purposes to, study how they could really get out of control. Some of the variants that could be the most harmful, the most likely variants of, that a virus could take, how harmful they could be, how to, deal with them, all that kind of stuff. And what it really kind of remarkably seems right now is we are, seeing in these new documents is that the patient zero worked at the lab where the lab leak theory goes. This is how the lab got out, how the virus got out. One of the first Wuhan researchers reportedly sickened with COVID in the fall of 2019, Ben Hu, was getting U.S. financial support for risky gain-of-function research on coronaviruses, according to documents obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request by transparency advocacy organization White Coat Waste Project. The funding came in 3 grants totaling $41 million, doled out by USAID, the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, or NIAID, which is an agency that was headed at the time by one Dr. Anthony Fauci, who is listed as an investigator on the grants. So, this is money that, and this is why I said it's important to, do I trust the American people not to say, China virus, and stop, start attacking Asians, in the street or not attack Asians in the street for when this, becomes more broadly known because, there is a lot of really stupid people out there. No, I absolutely do not, which is kind of why, I don't want it to be true. And I don't want it to kind of gain widespread purchase. But I think it is really clear and really important, if you're actually looking at this logically, is to say, hold on a minute, the U.S. funded a lab. I don't know how much the Chinese government, what role the Chinese government really played in it, but it is really clear that the U.S. government funded a lab that did research, gain-of-function research on the coronavirus or on novel coronaviruses, or at least made a novel coronavirus. The novel coronavirus got out, this kind of gain-of-function created novel coronavirus got out from the Wuhan lab, or at least got to Ben Hu, who's an investigator in the lab, and then that got out, that got around Wuhan, and the rest is history, frankly. The news that the U.S. intelligence had learned that 3 Wuhan Institute of Virology lab workers had been hospitalized with COVID symptoms in November of 2019, significantly before the outbreak at the city's seafood market, was first reported by Wall Street Journal in May of 2021. But the revelation had curiously little impact on the broader debate over the origin of the pandemic, even if it would invalidate, if confirmed, the whole claim that the pandemic originated at the Hunan seafood wholesale market when the virus allegedly jumped from an animal to a human. As no such animal has been identified, but new reporting by Michael Schellenberger and Matt Taibbi, sourced to 3 government sources with the State Department investigation, has identified 3 lab workers as Ben-Hu, Yuping, and Yan Zhu. 2 of the grants from 2014 to 2019, they ran from 2014 to 2019. And again, this is what I worry about. Very stereotypically Asian names. They're facing to be plastered up on TV screens. But who's behind this? Literally Anthony Fauci and the USAID, who okayed this research. And these people, through maybe one mistake, or someone didn't wear the right mask, or just slipped through. Who even knows how it happened? But that simple mistake created a worldwide pandemic. So 2 of the grants, again, they ran from 2014 through 19. The third was cut off in 2020 by Donald Trump after the outbreak in Wuhan. The NIAID and the USAID grants list Hu as an investigator in the project being funded. Hu is a top deputy to Shi Zhengli, known in the virology world as Batwoman, for her work extracting samples from viruses of bats in Chinese caves. So they were studying literally viruses born from bats. Does that sound familiar? And then all of a sudden, this guy is one of the first people to get COVID, if not the first. So the FOIA documents were obtained by White Coat Waste in 2021, but are given new relevance with the reporting of Hu's involvement. It'd be interesting, frankly, it'd be nice to see this get confirmed independently, outside of someone like Schellenberger and Taibbi. So it'll be very interesting. But we also have the Times of London here, meanwhile, reporting new details about the activity in the Wuhan Institute of Virology in the run-up to the pandemic, similarly sourced to 3 investigators within the U.S. State Department. That report includes allegations about Wuhan Lab's collaboration with the Chinese military scientists, buttressing what had once been dismissed as a fringe conspiracy theory that the virus was related to bioweapons research. In the lead-up to the pandemic, the Wuhan Institute frequently experimented on coronaviruses alongside the Academy of Military Medical Sciences, a research arm of the People's Liberation Army. And again, this is where it kind of gets a little sketchy because, the U.S. also had a major hand in funding this research. So it's not as if, China was plotting with this lab to create a bioweapon to unleash on the world. We were funding that research just the same. In published papers, military scientists are listed as working for the Beijing Institute of Microbiology and Epidemiology, which is the military academy's base. So much of the time's investigation on the virus is found in a mine where workers were sickened in 2012, leading to hospitalizations and deaths. Another key question probed by the State Department investigators relates to a project that was proposed to the Pentagon by Xi and 2 collaborators, Ralph Barrick of the University of North Carolina and Peter Daszak, there he is, of EcoHealth Alliance. The proposal was submitted to the DARPA, Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, entailed inserting a furin cleavage site into a coronavirus. It was rejected, but speculation remains as to whether some of the research was conducted anyway. So really, really interesting stuff coming from both this time investigation, the Schellenberger-Taibbi report here about naming these 3 first, some of the first 3 patients to get it, and really talking about their roles, and then this very interesting kind of bioweapons connection here, talking about, was this part of, analyzing how this could be used as a bioweapon with, very interestingly, funding from or ties to both the Chinese and American governments, which are supposed to be at such loggerheads, playing a big role in all of this. Very, very interesting stuff. All right. After these messages, we will get to a big story out of the Jenin refugee camp in the occupied West Bank.
This ain't what you want. Project this ain't what you want. This ain't what you want.
You're listening to Newsflash right here on the Spencer Walsh Radio Network. Help us grow our audience. Subscribe, rate, and review our show on whatever podcast platform you're listening on. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much for listening to today's episode of Newsflash. We are getting into a pretty big story out of Israel, where the Israeli occupation forces killed 5 Palestinians, including a child, after encountering fierce resistance during an hours-long raid in the northern West Bank city of Jenin, which has a major refugee camp from some of the displaced Palestinians, and has also been one of the big sites of kind of very young people who feel probably the most hopeless with the ongoing fight against the Israeli regime, and have now been, really kind of banding up into militias to challenge both the really ineffective PA, the Palestinian Authority, which is supposed to control the West Bank, and the Israeli government in general. So, separately, Israeli troops have also shot the 20-year-old Zakaria al-Zaul in the head during confrontations in the Husan village near the West Bank city of Bethlehem late Monday, killing him as well. Meanwhile, 2 soldiers were injured and 2 Palestinians shot on Monday after the latter allegedly accelerated a vehicle towards troops at a checkpoint near Jenin. One of the alleged Palestinian assailants was reported to be critically injured. More than 90 Palestinians were injured during the daytime raid in Jenin. One of them was a 15-year-old girl in critical condition after she was struck by a stray bullet while in her home. This is, again, tightly packed refugee camp type situations where also, I believe, they shot Shireen Abu Akleh, intentionally. They saw she was doing a press pass and continued to shoot her down with a sniper from a long distance away. And now they are, continuing to, what they obviously will say is to catch terrorists, but also it plays a really big role in inciting fear in these populations who are essentially completely powerless, disenfranchised, taken from their homes, all that kind of stuff. Really, really awful stuff. And again, not caring if in the crossfire a 15-year-old girl is in critical condition, struck by a stray bullet. At least 7 Israeli soldiers and border officials were wounded during the raid, most of them injured by an explosive device targeting a military vehicle, and their injuries were reportedly light to moderate. Even in a year where Israeli forces have launched pretty deadly daytime raids in Palestinian cities, several in Jenin alone, Monday's incursion marked an escalation. This again, where Israel sought to arrest 2 wanted men. They essentially bring, what is a small army into this refugee camp, just busting down doors, using maximum amount of violence and explosives and ammo to make their message heard. So they even used a special gift from us back home, the Apache attack helicopter in the West Bank for the first time in 2 decades to facilitate the evacuation of ambushed troops. So pretty remarkable stuff. Because one of the more remarkable one of the remarkable moments here was that they really kind of did fight back. 5 dead, 2 of their teams from the Palestinian side. At least 91 were wounded in the clashes. There's some really incredible firefights here in Jenin. Some of the video coming out on the ground. Helicopters, Israeli Air Force attack helicopters opened fire from the skies over Jenin as Israeli troops to help Israeli troops leave the city, the IDF said, as they were kind of really fought back from Palestinian militias. They were met with some pretty intense fire from Palestinian militias, and of course they said, they're not trapped, and they're getting out of Jenin just very nice and easy, no problems, of course. In any sense, it's all good. Don't worry about it. Which is, classic. Let's get into kind of more of this resistance moment here from the Palestinians. The helicopter was hit, this Apache attack helicopter hit by a Palestinian gunfire, but remained operational. Several military, which is kind of surprising, U.S.-made helicopters don't really have too great of a record, at least in recent years. The helicopter was hit by Palestinian gunfire but remained operational. Several military vehicles, including a 10-ton Panther armored vehicle, were incapacitated by Palestinian resistance fighters, which is a pretty big deal because, really marks a big step up in their capacity from the past. An Israeli military spokesman said the Panther and another military vehicle were hit by a pretty advanced IED. He said it will affect how we do business in the future, adding the troops came under a massive amount of gunfire. As you can see, the troops, the thing kind of just slumped, the tires flat, there's pictures out. It's pretty clear the thing is not going anywhere. Amir Bobot, military correspondent from the Israeli news site Walla, remarked that the units that raided Jenin were surprised today by the strength of the resistance. He added that the classic ambush was reminiscent of the more advanced tactics of Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hamas in Gaza. Multiple videos circulated online showing these strong explosive devices detonating next to military vehicles and army coming under fire from multiple directions. So, pretty good to see at least some sort of resistance, because really it seems that the only language a bully understands is power. That kind of classic idea that if you want someone to stop messing around with you, a la North Korea getting a nuke or Libya giving up their nukes. Look what happened to them. This kind of classic strategy that you need some sort of deterrence, is obviously not the best solution. The best solution is peace, civil rights, ending the apartheid, whatever. But if you have strong resistance, if you have that, fear on the other side, that every time a settler tries to go in the neighborhood, or every time they come to try and, scare the crap out of villagers, the IDF with their tanks and their guns and all that, they have a increasingly lingering, voice in the back of their mind telling them, wait a minute, this cannot be good here. I'm going to have to get my act together. I want to, get this all straightened out. I want to make sure that I want to make sure that I am not going to get killed here. I could get ambushed. Before he thought they were rolling in, essentially just having target practice, and it would be a pretty big deal. If that was something that they really started to weigh into their calculations more and more and more. The armed wing of Hamas published a video showing its fighters testing explosive device that it credited to its engineering unit in the Jenin refugee camp, which is pretty interesting. So the Palestinian armored outlets circulated video showing Israeli forces towing destroyed military vehicles, including the Panther armored vehicle that they essentially just, again, had to just tow out with, backhoes, essentially, which is pretty embarrassing for such a well-funded military, coming under pretty heavy fire while they were towing out them as well. Videos were also posted showing the Palestinians parading parts of the ambushed military vehicles through the streets of Jenin. So good for them there for sure. Hamas leader Abd al-Rahman Shadid said the Israeli casualties in disabled military vehicles point to an evolution of the capabilities of the resistance fighters in the West Bank. Abu Hamza, the pseudonymous spokesperson for the armed wing of the Islamic Jihad resistance group, promised more surprises for occupation forces so long as Israel continues its policy of assassination and violating prisoners' rights and the sanctity of holy sites. So this increased resistance could really make things interesting in terms of the calculations that these people try and bring. The calculations that Israelis make, that settlers make when they come into any kind of continuing encroach on territory, that the Palestinians maybe aren't quite as defenseless as they may seem. All right, with that being said, it is Juneteenth, and we are remembering it. We got a hidden history that is special to, Civil War, really getting into one of the biggest moments kind of in Black history that was really just under-discussed. That'll be this Friday on the Hidden History episode. But we really wanted to highlight this moment, one of the more remarkable moments that I kind of caught in these times. Is a pretty big moment in the civil rights movement. They write, this Juneteenth, the unofficial holiday marking the abolition of slavery. Now it is really official. We are marking this holiday by reprinting the testimony of Fannie Lou Hamer, delivered nearly more than half a century ago. Nearly more than half a century ago. This was actually published back in 2017. But they talk about 1964, so that is now 49 years, I guess. This August, this really incredible speech given by Fannie Lou Hamer, the civil rights activist, to the Credentials Committee of the DNC in Atlantic City that year. The co-founder and organizer with the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party and Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, Hamer shared with the committee her direct experience of racist violence and voter suppression. The former sharecropper's attempts to persuade the Democratic Party establishment to reject the segregationist Mississippi Democratic Party were not immediately successful. However, her leadership played a pivotal role in building the Black Freedom Movement and drawing nationwide attention to brutal racist violence. Hamer's warnings about the suppression of the black vote, as well as the rise of vigilante, racist violence, and law enforcement repression, prove prescient for our current moment as we celebrate the official end of slavery in the United States. Hamer's fight for true emancipation, along with all of black and other marginalized people all across the world, their fight still continues to this day. I want to end with a little clip that kind of ties it all together from PBS, from the Summer of Freedom documentary, talking about the Fannie Lou Hamer press conference, or the Fannie Lou Hamer testimony to the convention, and the response by President Lyndon Johnson. Here it is.
The testimony before the Credentials Committee, the FDP had a lineup of very different people. They had Rita Schwerner, the widow of Mickey, who had been killed in Neshoba County. They had Martin Luther King. Everybody knew King.
The seating of the delegation from the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party has political and moral significance far beyond the borders of Mississippi or the halls of this convention.
But the highlight of the testimony was that of Fannie Lou Hamer. The sharecropper who had been evicted from her plantation had come to symbolize the Mississippi movement.
Mr. Chairman, and to the Credentials Committee, it was the 31st of August in 1962 that 18 of us traveled 26 miles to the county courthouse in Indianola to try to register to become first-class citizens. We was met in Indianola by policemen.
The president, Lyndon Johnson, he's not afraid of Martin Luther King's testimony. He's afraid of Fannie Lou Hamer's testimony. And so he decides that the country should not see her testify live.
Johnson is in the White House, and he convened an impromptu press conference.
We will return to this scene in Atlantic City, but now we switch to the White House and NBC's Robert Goralski.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
On this day, 9 months ago.
He did it knowing that they would break away, thinking he might announce who his choice of vice president was going to be. Instead, he gets up there and he announces, get this, he announces that it's 9 months to the day since Governor Connolly, who was there, was shot along with President Kennedy. So he announced a 9-month anniversary. Everybody's scratching their heads.
Thank you very much.
And then he leaves. And by that time, Fannie Lou Hamer's testimony was over. However, it backfired on Johnson because it became a story that she had been taken off television, and in the news that night and for days afterwards, they replayed her testimony.
I was carried to the county jail and put in the booking room. They left some of the people in the booking room and began to place us in cells.
She had Mississippi in her bones. Martin Luther King or the SNCC field secretaries, they couldn't do what Fannie Lou Hamer did. They couldn't be a sharecropper and express what it meant, right? And that's what Fannie Lou Hamer did.
Ladies and gentlemen, we will return on Wednesday. Thank you so much for listening to Newsflash. To play us out, we will listen to a good chunk here of Fannie Lou Hamer's full speech.
After we had taken this test and started back to Roosevelt, we was held up by the city police and the state highway patrolmen and carried back to Indianola, where the bus driver was charged that day with driving a bus the wrong color. After we paid the fine among us, we continued on to Roosevelt, and Reverend Jeff Sonny carried me 4 miles in the rural area where I had worked as a timekeeper and sharecropper for 18 years. I was met there by my children that told me the plantation owner was angry because I had gone down, tried to register. After they told me, my husband came and said the plantation owner was raising Cain because I had tried to register. And before he quit talking, the plantation owner came and said, Fannie Lou, do you know, did Pap tell you what I said? And I said, yes, sir. He said, well, I mean that, said, if you don't go down and withdraw your registration, you will have to leave. Said, then if you go down and withdraw, that you still might have to go because we are not ready for that in Mississippi. And I addressed him and told him that I didn't try to register for you. I tried to register for myself. I had to leave that same night. On the 10th of September, 1962, 16 bullets was fired into the home of Mr. and Mrs. Robert Tucker for me. That same night, 2 girls were shot in Roosevelt, Mississippi. Also, Mr. Joe McDonald's house was shot in. In June the 9th, 1963, I had attended a voter registration workshop, was returning back to Mississippi. 10 of us was traveling by the Continental Trailway bus. When we got to Winona, Mississippi, which is Montgomery County, 4 of the people got off to use the washroom, and 2 of the people to use the restaurant. 2 of the people wanted to use the washroom. The 4 people that had gone in to use the restaurant was ordered out. During this time, I was on the bus. But when I looked through the window and saw they had rushed out, I got off of the bus to see what had happened. And one of the ladies said it was a state highway patrolman and a chief of police ordered us out. I got back on the bus, and one of the persons who had used the washroom got back on the bus too. As soon as I was seated on the bus, I saw when they began to get the 5 people in a highway patrolman's car. I stepped off of the bus to see what was happening, and somebody screamed from the car that the fire workers was in and said, get that one there. And when I went to get in the car, when the man told me I was under arrest, he kicked me. I was carried to the county jail and put in the booking room. They left some of the people in the booking room and began to place us in cells. I was placed in a cell with a young woman called Miss Vesta Simpson. After I was placed in the cell, I began to hear sounds of licks and screams. I could hear the sounds of licks and horrible screams. And I could hear somebody say, can you say yes, sir, nigger? Can you say yes, sir? And they would say other horrible names. She would say, yes, I can say yes, sir. So, well, say it. She said, I don't know you well enough. They beat her I don't know how long. And after a while, she began to pray and ask God to have mercy on those people. And it wasn't too long before 3 white men came to my cell. One of these men was a state highway patrolman. And he asked me where I was from. And I told him Roosevelt. He said, we're going to check this. And they left my cell, and it wasn't too long before they came back. He said, you are from Roosevelt, all right, and he used a curse word. And he said, we're going to make you wish you was dead.